And so when you look at countries that succeed well, it's almost like families that succeed well. You know, are they well educated, well behaved? Do they have harmony? Do they have those solid values of being productive, or is there corruption and so on?
Throughout history, there have been a lot of risings and fallings of many civilizations, empires, and nations around the world. Almost every region on the planet had its own golden era, where it thrived and reached remarkable heights of prosperity, power, and influence. Everything from the Greek, the Roman, the British, and the Ottoman empires, as well as many others, have experienced their own periods of great and prosperous times. Many of these nations, driven by ambition and innovation, took control over vast territories, created advanced technologies, and made big shifts in everything that we call our world today. However, history also shows us that there's a cycle and there's also an inevitable decline. Such decline in a country starts representing itself in economic challenges, internal conflicts, external pressures, and shifts in the dynamics of power in the world. And we can clearly see these cycles happening over and over again throughout history. But what really makes a nation or a country succeed or fail? And what are exactly some of the most important factors that can lead to such success or failure, according to Ray Dalio? Here's what he said.
Corruption. For example, there are corruption indices between countries that show the different corruption levels. There's a negative 54% correlation between the level of a country's corruption and its growth rate over the next 10 years. So there are those basic elements.
Probably one of the most prominent signs of a declining country is the level of corruption that it has. When corruption spreads in a society, it creates a lot of inefficiencies in operations and in many different areas in that society. These inefficiencies represent themselves in, for example, money being largely misused, projects being delayed, and smart and talented people ending up in the wrong places where they don't actually belong, whereas incompetent people usually take over instead. This leads to a cascading domino effect across every aspect in that specific society. Even basic things like public services, healthcare, and education can very much suffer from that. Also, corruption can be a roadblock to a lot of foreign investments in a country's economy. This leads to less money flowing into that economy and therefore leading to fewer opportunities, lower growth rates, and lower income for the country and its citizens. So corruption is one of the most prominent signs that show up in a failing country, and it gets even worse the further that country would allow it to. Another very important factor that determines the success of a certain country is its financial health, and the fact that it needs to be earning more than spending. Almost half of the population in the world live in countries that spend more paying interest on their national debt than on their own infrastructure, like health and education. So such sovereign debt issues do not only exist on papers in such countries, but also affect the people who are living there as well. On the contrary, nations that do not have such financial problems and sovereign debt issues generally tend to have better living standards and more developed infrastructure. This financial stability allows them to invest more in areas like education, healthcare, and overall societal well-being. In addition, a stable financial situation in a country can even attract more foreign investments in its economy, which can also further increase its economic growth and development. But unfortunately, corruption usually plays a significant role in this matter, since it is directly tied to how the money is being used and where it is actually going.
Look, there's no difference between an individual's finances and a country's finances, other than the country has the ability to print money. So if you spend more than you earn, you will produce a debt. A debt must be repaid. That'll either be in hard money or in soft money because you print it. And so it's not the same for countries. The income statement, the balance sheet, is very much like in individuals. If you're earning more than you're spending and you have a good balance sheet, then you have the financial health. If you don't have financial health, then you don't have health, because a lot of this is all about living standards. I mean, what do people want? If you don't provide them with good living standards, you'll have a revolution. So that requires financial health. And the financial health is the same for a country as it is for an individual, except the central banks can print money.
Now, a very crucial factor which also has a tremendous effect on a country's growth is the quality of education that its people are getting. This, according to Ray Dalio, is not only limited to what type of skills or theory that the students are learning, but also when it comes to basic things like how to behave with others and so on. Such knowledge and education about civility is what prevents internal issues from happening and creates a healthy environment for everyone to grow. And this is also one of the important things that Ray Dalio highlights in his interview.
Most importantly, how do you educate your children? And education, I don't mean just education such as I know my reading, writing, and arithmetic, or I know how to do algorithms or something like that. Education in character development. Does the individual know how to control oneself, to work well with others, civility? Because through those things, good education develops skills, but working well with each other creates both productivity and harmony and makes for a better society.
Now, Ray Dalio also talks about what he refers to as the Renaissance states. These states or countries tend to not have much external conflict with other countries, and they also almost benefit when such conflicts erupt internationally. The countries he referred to are mainly countries like Singapore, Switzerland, as well as the UAE and its region. Now, if we take a look at these countries' finances, they do have a low national debt to GDP ratio in comparison to other countries, except for Singapore, which has around 167% debt to its GDP as of 2022, and which has also been increasing in the last few years. But when it comes to its GDP per capita, for example, it is still among the highest in the world, along with the other previously mentioned countries. So they are all relatively in good financial health. Also, when it comes to these countries' infrastructure like transportation, education, and health, all of them do have very well developed infrastructure and they do score very high in that regard. And so is the case when it comes to their safety rankings according to multiple sources. So they are one of few countries where people can feel comfortable wearing expensive watches and jewelry while being outside without having to worry too much about that, which unfortunately is not happening to be the case in many well-developed countries around the world. Moreover, these countries have been very successful in attracting many foreign talents, investments, as well as businesses, as they have made the process of relocating there for those much more convenient than in many other places around the world.
Those types of things create relative advantages for environments such as Singapore, Switzerland to some extent, and what we're seeing here in the areas that you mentioned, the UAE and the region. And so they become the Renaissance states. Like if you look about where were the Renaissances in history, they were the places where there was great trade and education, and they offered a lot of inventiveness and so on. And they were not in the middle of the wars. They almost benefited from the wars. And so talent magnets, yes, as you're describing, they're talent magnets. They're bringing these intelligent people. They're educating their populations well, and they're bringing that diversity of perspective to take the best of the best in a world now where there's strategic competition. So even the ability to use each other's technologies is limited. Right now, these places have access to different technologies and different ways of thinking, which is a competitive advantage.
Now, Ray Dalio also highlights the magic ingredient to achieve prosperity, according to him. The main key point that he talked about was having human capital, or talented people in other words, and allocating money and resources to them, at the same time while having a rule of law and a safe environment for them to grow. Because when it really comes down to it, if a country does not have much natural resources to utilize and export to other countries, the only thing that it is left with is its own human capital. Since human capital could be worth a lot more than any natural resource, only if it has the right circumstances and environment to grow.
The magic is taking the talented, creative, can-do, entrepreneurial type of person, and I don't mean just in business. Maybe it's an entrepreneurial type of person in science, somebody who can imagine the future and make it happen and get resources to them. So that's one of the reasons that capitalism has been effective as a means of getting, we're all trying to find who's the smartest person who's then going to take that and convert that into productivity and so on. So capital, rule of law, capital, and the talent is the magic ingredient. You take a talented person and you put capital to that talented person and you create an environment that works well, and you have prosperity.
Now finally, probably the most important factor that determines a country's level of success is the level of corruption that it has. Because unfortunately, corruption is cancerous. And once it starts spreading within a society and specifically reaches its judicial system, the whole society starts to sink until it hits the lowest rankings on all measures. And in contrast, if the judicial system is fairly intact, meaning that the average person can guarantee their rights and has full faith in it, then there's always hope for that society to grow and prosper. Since usually a just judicial system that is properly functioning and does not discriminate between an influential figure and an average person is the very foundation upon which a healthy environment can be created, and which therefore can provide a chance for that society to actually function in harmony and prosper. So that was it for this video. If you found this helpful, you can click here to watch this one. Other than that, make sure to leave a thumbs up and to subscribe to the channel. And with that being said, see you in the next one.